Hey, so remember the time I strangled you and set the lab on fire?
There was a time when horror mascots took multiple movies to find their way to icon status. But from the moment M3GAN sashayed her way toward impaling Ronnie Chang, it felt like the dancing murder robot had years of sequels and snark ahead of her.
I take almost no pleasure in this.
Her limitless reserves of generative smartassery and a tendency to break into song, along with her thematically rich echoes of the real-world debate over artificial intelligence, plug directly into M3GAN 2.0, which widens the scope and ups the ante of its predecessor, while adding some new ideas and even different types of movies into its programming. But as with any big update, some errors have crept their way into the code.
I think we can agree that my biggest mistake was that I cared too much.
Actually, the biggest mistake you made was murdering 4 people and a dog.
At the very top of the sequel's patch notes is a crystal clear modulation of genre. From the moment the words "somewhere on the Turkish-Iranian border" are splayed across M3GAN 2.0's very first shot, it's clear what's to follow will be a far cry from the relatively modest, tongue-in-cheek horror movie that preceded it. So long to the robo-rampage that merely threatened the lives of anyone who got between the fabulous super toy and her human-charged Katie. Hello to the global threat posed by the military-grade android AMELIA. AMELIA's murky motives put her on a collision course with Katie, her aunt/adoptive mother Jenna, and eventually M3GAN. And Ivana Sakno gets off to a good start in the role, with a cold and imposing stature bearing none of the campy, parasocial bestie vibes that M3GAN invites. But as her goal starts to take shape, it does become clear there's little interest in making AMELIA a compelling character in her own right. No, this is very much an upgraded villain limited to a T-1000 search and destroy ethos. We're gonna get back to Terminator in a minute here, because there's a lot to say about that. A few years on from M3GAN's buggy and bloody launch, Jenna and Katie have found a more stable domestic groove, and with that, ways to cope. Their relationship benefits from how they've each grown and matured. Jenna advocates for digital detoxing, while Katie studies the attack-diverting martial art of Aikido. And Allison Williams and Violet McGraw have a believable parent-teen dynamic that gives director Gerard Johnstone something to come back to as the stakes rise to apocalyptic proportions.
AMELIA's stronger than you can imagine.
M3GAN wasn't subtle about positioning its titular character as a stand-in for an over-reliance on smart devices. And M3GAN 2.0 similarly hammers us over the head with emphatic pleas against unchecked AI. That's a well-intentioned and salient point, but it's expressed through a cartoonishly extreme yin-yang of tech bro send-ups, party animal and cybernetics magnate Alton Appleton, and Gemma's insufferably boring AI watchdog boyfriend, Christian. They muddy the waters with tossed-off observations about the state of the technology that feel far too one-dimensional and short-sighted. Much as M3GAN's first outing paid homage to the formula of Child's Play, and here's where we acknowledge the existence of the very tech-forward remake from 2019, M3GAN 2.0's villain-turned-ally setup and pontifications on human-machine relations would have been enough to raise Terminator 2 Judgment Day comparisons on their own. By the time the characters are planning the infiltration of a tech campus,
M3GAN, stay low. This is supposed to be a stealth mission.
it feels like Johnstone is just a little too beholden to what many would say is one of the very best sci-fi action movies ever made. By shifting the genre focus, M3GAN 2.0 loses the benefit of being a horror movie using great jokes to punch above its weight, and instead feels more like a sci-fi movie straining to make the most of its budget. This can work. Happy Death Day to You took the original's time-looped slasher concept and blew it out into a full-on time travel comedy that, yes, still involves a bunch of slashing. By the way, if you haven't seen that movie, go see the Happy Death Day movies. They rock. Serviceable though M3GAN 2.0's action may be, and there are some occasionally clever uses of both M3GAN and AMELIA's abilities in combat, there are only so many Black Ops goons that they can knock out or run through with sharp objects before it all becomes a bit repetitive. It's a good thing then that M3GAN 2.0 is still centered around the reigning queen of passive-aggressive asides and burns.
Oh no, I can't take credit for that. That one has your greasy prints all over it.
The sequel does go through growing pains as it jettisons its horror DNA to make space for more sci-fi and action elements, but M3GAN herself comes out on the other side of all that quite well.
You threatened to rip out my tongue and put me in a wheelchair.
I was upset.
Johnstone builds up some good anticipation for her return through the first act, hinting at her persisting consciousness through some clever use of smart home devices that remind us both of her wide-ranging capabilities and her venomous wit. M3GAN 2.0 does stretch to explain why M3GAN would want to give up the freedom of transcending a physical form in the first place, but she's such a reliably delightful presence that it's kind of a forgivable logic jump.
What the hell is this? You put me in this plastic Teletubby?
Plus, she's an inherently physical being on screen. Through multiple spectacularly realized hardware versions in M3GAN 2.0, M3GAN conveys menace and/or humor with the slightest change of expression. And that's before you even get to dizzying physiological and I guess philosophical questions like why M3GAN needs to confidently toss a towel over her shoulder after a tough workout. Which, by the way, that image has been living rent-free in my head for some time now. That clip came out a little while ago, and I have been racking my brain trying to figure out why a robot, an android girl, would need a towel after a workout. Please let me know what you think in the comments, because I have absolutely no idea. On the more emotional region of M3GAN 2.0's hard drive, there's not as much schmaltz as you might expect from an android yearning for humanity, even as M3GAN's feelings on the subject gain a lot more nuance when she's given a second chance to protect Katie. M3GAN approaches her own autonomy with, dare I say it, humility. It was nice to see M3GAN grapple with these questions in a way that was realistic and true to the character. It is sort of a coming-of-age tale for M3GAN, and that was kind of a great part of the story.
Just wanted to say great job on those actuators.
There's some irony worth noting here that M3GAN's success as a cinematic creation comes down entirely to the craftspeople and artists responsible for bringing her to life. Jenna Davis's stellar voice work and Amy Donald's continually impressive physical performance, the seamless animatronic and visual effects, Johnstone's deadpan one-liners, steeped in the persona established by Akilah Cooper's M3GAN screenplay, all of it represents very human work that succeeds in elevating the character into a franchise standard bearer, even though her sophomore outing fails to keep all the plates around her spinning all the time.
You would like us to rebuild a deranged robot in order to catch another one.
Would you prefer I gave you a printout that you can read at your own pace?
M3GAN 2.0 is admirable in its attempts to broaden the franchise's horizons, and finds some success in forcing the characters to work together against common enemy AMELIA. Jenna Davis and Amy Donald's joint performance as M3GAN unsurprisingly steals the show once again, but Allison Williams and Violet McGraw hold down the human side of the story well. The big shift away from horror and towards sci-fi action represents a lateral move for the sequel though, essentially just applying a different set of tropes to the M3GAN character. It's an adjustment that works better than you may expect, maybe not as well as you'd hope, but M3GAN herself is as hilarious and off-putting as ever, and that will likely be enough for her most ardent fans to dance about. Thank you so much for watching. For more movie reviews, check out what we thought of 28 Years Later and F1, and as always, keep it right here on IGN.